The Philadelphia Eagles defense lost a lot of starters this offseason, but I'm not subscribing to the idea of them taking a step back in 2025. I'll tell you why coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to this Monday edition of the show. I'm your host, as always, Louis DiBiase. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use our code LOCKEDONNFL in all capital letters for $20 off your first purchase. So I've seen this take toss around a lot this offseason that the Philadelphia Eagles defense, it's still going to be really good. I feel like everybody's in agreement there. They have core long-term pieces finally in all three phases, right? The defensive line, the middle of the field at linebacker, and the secondary at corner and safety. They have long-term building blocks, pillars at pretty much every position. But I think the majority of Eagles fans and media analysts themselves agree as well that they're going to take a step back from 2024 to 2025. And I do understand a lot of the points that people make in defense of that take, right? The defense lost a lot of starters. In the secondary, Darius Slay is in Pittsburgh. C.J. Gardner-Johnson is in Houston. Josh Sweat on the defensive line is in Arizona. Milton Williams is in New England. Nakobe Dean is likely to miss time to start the season. That's 5 different starters from last year's unit that at least week 1 are not going to be out there for Eagles Cowboys to open up the season on Thursday Night Football. So with that being said, you also can add the fact that these young replacements that are taking over for these starters are unproven, and they'll likely take some time to grow into this bigger role. Also, they were the number 1 ranked defense last year, so it's hard to get much better than what they were last year, which, again, I agree with most of these points. Like last year's defense, it's going to be really hard to top what they did. It was one of the greatest defensive seasons in the history of the NFL, including a historic defensive performance in the Super Bowl to top it off, where the defense completely terrorized a top 2 player, in my opinion, in NFL history, and completely neutralized Andy Reid's game plan. And Andy Reid, I think, is the greatest play caller in the history of the NFL. And if you don't agree with that, most of you probably agree that he's at least top 3. So, yes, I agree with most of those takes. They lost a lot of starters. They were the number 1 ranked defense in football last year. It was a historic season. A lot of these young guys might take some time to get their feet wet during the season, but I do truly still believe that they can maintain that top level of play that they had last year. I don't believe this defense is going to take a step back from what they were in 2024. Now, am I saying they're going to be even better than they were last year, that they're going to be number 1 again in pretty much every category and they're going to be considered like a top 5 defense of all time? No. But I think they can maintain who they were last year without really taking much of a step back. Although they lost a lot of these starters, like let's contextualize each player, like what they truly lost, because it seems like those guys were all elite walking out the door because you have your Super Bowl blinders on. Josh Sweat, if it wasn't for Jalen Hurts getting that dagger touchdown throw in the second half, Josh Sweat is likely the Super Bowl MVP. So that's the last thing you remember about Josh Sweat. You know, Milton Williams, again, the last thing you remember about Milton Williams was that he was chasing Patrick Mahomes up and down the field for 4 straight quarters. Like Darius Slay had a really solid year last year. C.J. Gardner-Johnson, who I did not want to lose, had 6 interceptions, but none of these players were truly elite all year long. It's not like they lost Jalen Carter and Quinyon Mitchell, and it's not like they let Zack Baun walk in free agency. Like if they did that, that would be another conversation where I feel like this defense would take a step back. But the guys they lost were good role players, but they weren't elite starters. They were very good. A lot of these guys were very good, like good to great, but none of them were great to elite. So I don't think it's going to be completely impossible to replace Josh Sweat's production from 2024. I think who Josh Sweat was in the regular season, who was a solid player, led the Eagles in sacks with 8, but he was kind of up and down, hot and cold throughout the year. I think Jalen Hunt can replace that production, or a combination of him and Azeez Ojulari and Joshua Uche can replace what they're missing out on the edge in Josh Sweat departing and Brandon Graham. When you combine the two, I don't think it's a super high bar to say that Jalen Hunt, Azeez Ojulari, and Joshua Uche can be just as good as 2024 regular season Josh Sweat. Super Bowl Josh Sweat was a superhero, so that's a different story. But the majority of the year, Sweat was a good, not great pass rusher. I don't think it's crazy to say that they'll be okay without that player. And that's not to, again, lessen these players' impacts on the 2024 season. But, I think people saying that they're going to take a huge step back because they're losing all these guys, I think it's kind of overblown. I think Moro Ijoma can be statistically who he was last year again, which was, from an efficiency perspective, a pass rush win rate perspective, a PFF, rushing grade perspective, a top 10 to top 15 pass rusher on the interior of the defensive line. Now, is he going to be the number one graded overall player like Milton Williams? Probably not, but a Moro Ijoma rise in year 3, Jordan Davis hopefully taking that next step. I think that can replace who Milton Williams was in the regular season. Keely Ringo can be who Darius Slay was in 2024. Darius Slay was very underrated last year, but he was a good cornerback. He wasn't elite. He was the third best corner in that starting lineup. I think Keely Ringo can be that guy this year as well for the Eagles secondary, and I think he'll have a much better chance of staying healthy. Darius Slay was on and off the field last year dealing with nagging injuries in a very Jason Peters kind of fashion. So the one move that I am skeptical they'll replace that production easily is losing CGJ. I'm a big Andrew Makuba guy, but I think CJ Gardner-Johnson, as I've said in the show before, could be the player that they miss the most. And again, there's a lot of ifs to what I just said. Jalen Hunt has to prove that those 5 games last year at the end of the year weren't just a flash in the pan. Moro Ijoma, it's a small sample size with these players. Joshua Uche was a healthy scratch down the stretch last year for Kansas City. Azeez Ojulari has to prove that he can stay healthy. So Keely Ringo has to show in year 3 he's ready to take that step. A lot of this is based on projection, but I don't think the ceiling is insurmountable to reach to say that these young replacement players on defense can be just as good, if not better, than who Josh Sweat was last year, who Milton Williams was, Darius Slay, and CJ Gardner-Johnson, and even Nakobe Dean to start the year. Jahan Campbell is a guy that this defense did not have last year, a different type of player that can wreck a ball game in coverage against the run as an inside linebacker, blitzing through the A-gap, rushing on the edge. That's an element to this defense that the 2024 defense did not have. And the other part of this to consider is also the young nucleus of stars that they did not lose, the actual star players that are going to carry this unit like they did last year. Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean. The other part of this to consider is that these guys are going to get better. Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, it feels like they can't get better. They were Rookie of the Year finalists last year. But I think both of them are going to get better in year 2. Jalen Carter, as Vic Fangio said a couple weeks ago, this kid is still just scratching the surface of his potential of who he can be as a refined, developed defensive tackle. Fangio said he's still kind of just playing off instinct. He's still a raw player heading into year 3. There's another level to get into. Same with Nolan Smith. The breakout started last year, but I think Nolan Smith was just scratching the surface, and he really started to turn it on down the stretch. Again, he had 4.5 sacks in the playoffs. So even Jordan Davis you talk about, that's a pillar on the interior of the defensive line. He had 2 sacks in the NFC Championship and the Super Bowl. A lot of these young stars that are the real faces of this defense, Josh Sweat, really good starter, but he wasn't a pillar of the defense. As good as Milton Williams was last year, same thing with him, and same thing with Darius Slay. These stars that are the face of this unit, I think, and you could also add Zack Baun into this equation. That was just his first year as a starting inside linebacker, and he was a first-team All-Pro. We're going to say that he can't get better this year in his second season with Vic Fangio in that system, his second year as a inside linebacker. He's only 2 years new to this position. I think it's very, and then you add the weapon of Jahan Campbell if he hits his ceiling. Again, it's a lot of ifs, But I think last year had a lot of ifs too. A lot of last year was based on projection. I don't think it's crazy to say that, again, I'm not saying this 2025 defense is going to be better than 2024, but I think maintaining who they were as a top 5, maybe even top 3, maybe even number 1 ranked overall defense again this year, I don't think that's crazy to say when you consider all the pieces that they have. Yes, the floor is definitely lower than it was last year. There's a lot less proven ability on this defense, but I think the ceiling is still the number 1 ranked defense in football, and I think the floor is still top 10. Because again, they didn't lose the star pillars of this defense that truly make it elite. And Baun said it himself last week, like they're much farther along right now at this time than they were last year. So yeah, they might have some growing pains early on in the season with a lot of new young starters, but last year's defense had a lot of growing pains too until like week 6 or 7 they really started to, heat up. So I think this defense can be just as good, and I don't subscribe to the fact that they're going to regress like a lot of people, other people are. I don't subscribe to the idea that this is going to be like the 2022 defense turning into the pumpkin that they were in 2023. I don't think that's going to happen, and I don't think you have to worry about that one bit. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, speaking of a lot of these role players that are going to have bigger roles in 2025, I want to do an over-under statistical prediction of some of these role players, what they're going to do from a numbers-based perspective in 2025. We'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. This Monday edition of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by Gametime. There's nothing like the NBA playoffs, and right now we're all tied up at 2 apiece between the Pacers and the Thunder in the NBA Finals. The intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their mind. We've had some incredible fan bases in the playoffs, including Oklahoma City and Indiana. They're losing it, and there's nothing like the NBA playoffs. It's the kind of atmosphere you must experience live, and this year's matchups are already delivering what you want. And if you want in, Gametime makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest playoff games, including the finals. Prices on the app actually drop closer to tip-off. And with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Gametime is a total game changer. I was just on the app, and Zone Deals were offering 10% off exclusive Zone Deals for FIFA World Cup matchups, so you can get in on the action with soccer, season tickets coming up for the NFL, for the Philadelphia Eagles, but not just sports, like comedy, concerts, theater, all that and more at Gametime. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. So as I said in segment 1, I don't think this Eagles defense in 2025 is going to take much of a step back. Now, maybe they're not the number 1 ranked defense in football, but I still think they're going to be top 10 is like the lowest floor for me. But I'm predicting they're going to still be top 5. If you told me they're top 3 or number 1 this year, I wouldn't be surprised. Yes, they lost a lot of starters, a lot of their young nucleus. It's still based on projection, especially for a lot of these, role players stepping into bigger, more full-time positions in 2025. But I still think they're going to maintain who they were down the stretch last year. I still think this is going to be one of, if not the best defenses in football, because they didn't lose pretty much anyone from their elite young nucleus on the defensive line, which is Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith. Those two are still there. At linebacker, it's Zack Baun. Nakobe Dean's still there. Jahan Campbell's added to the mix. In the secondary, you still have Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. I really like Keely Ringo and Drew Makuba. Reed Blankenship is still a core piece of that puzzle as well. He's still there, and he's going to get a contract extension, so I'm not too worried. And I think it's because, again, it is a projection, but I'm very high on Keely Ringo, on Drew Makuba, Sidney Brown even. Jahan Campbell at linebacker, Moro Ijoma and Jalix Hunt on the defensive line. I think they might get something out of Joshua Uche this year. And if not, I think Azeez Ojulari has proven, hey, we can bank on 5 to 7 sacks. Like, he can at least make up the sack total of one of Milton Williams and or Josh Sweat. So some people aren't as high on the replacement players they brought in, but I really am. And my over-unders on their statistics in 2025, I think that actually backs it up. So I actually did a breakdown of all the key role players on both sides of the ball, offense and defense, that are stepping into bigger spots in 2025. I did their over-unders for, important stats. And let me know if you agree with these. So to start, let's go with the defensive line. Moro Ujoma, I set the over-under, and we'll see what FanDuel sets this at closer to the season. Moro Ujoma, I set the over-under on his sack total this year at 4.5. Like, if you told me Moro Ujoma Milton Williams last year had 5.5. If you told me that Ujoma met that, if he matched what Williams did last year, I wouldn't be surprised. His over-under sack total at 4.5, I'm going to take the over. I think Moro Ujoma is going to thrive like he did last year statistically. I cannot say that word today, statistically, so bear with me. I think he's going to thrive just like he did last year with more snaps. I think he's going to have at least 5 sacks. I think he's going to match what Milton Williams did. Is he going to be the number 1 graded overall pass rushing defensive tackle like Milton was last year? No, but Jalen Carter makes everybody around him better. Jalen Carter demands double teams, triple teams. It's going to give Ujoma easier matchups, more one-on-one looks on the inside, and you can see what an advanced pass rusher that Ujoma is becoming, and I think he can really take that next step. So his over-under at 4.5 sacks, it might seem ambitious in his first year as a full-time starter, but I'm going to take the over. I think he gets at least 5 sacks this year. And then like other players on the defensive line, Jordan Davis, I set the over-under in his sacks at 2.5. So last year he only had, I think it was 1.5, and then he had 2 sacks in the playoffs. So he had one in the NFC Championship and the Super Bowl. I'm not projecting Jordan Davis is going to break out this year like a Dexter Lawrence or Vita Vea, and he's going to have, 7 to 10 sacks. I don't think he's going to be that guy, maybe ever, but he is in a contract season. He is coming off a really good playoff run where he showed he can affect the quarterback late into the year. He was in shape in the biggest spots, the biggest moments, the NFC Championship and the Super Bowl. He came away with a sack in both of those games. He seems like he's in great shape right now. Hopefully he can maintain that during the year, but his conditioning right now is off the charts. Vic Fangio said it himself. And again, the contract year thing is what I'm really harping on because it feels like every Eagle that's in a contract year just always balls out, including Josh Sweat last year. I'm projecting that Jordan Davis, he's going to take a step this year as a pass rusher. Again, I'm not saying a Dexter Lawrence, Vita Vea-like step, but it's going to be a lot more effective than it was last year. In the regular season, he had that 1 sack against the Saints, and then after that, he pretty much disappeared on third down and, obvious passing situations for the opposing offense. So I do think there's another level for him to get to. I would hope he can have at least 3 sacks this year, especially with more snaps. Milton Williams is gone. I don't think Moro Ujoma is going to play as much as Milton did last year. I think it's going to be a more even split. I think Jordan Davis will take on some of those snaps. So will rookie Ty Robinson, the 4th-round pick out of Nebraska. So I think Jordan Davis, again, there's a middle ground between who he was last year and, who we think he could still become. I would like him to at least get to 3 sacks. Like, that's the line I want him to get to, 3 to 3.5. I set the over-under at 2.5. I'm going to take the over on that and think optimistic on Jordan Davis. And then there's guys like Azeez Ojulari and Joshua Uche. I set the over-under at 4.5 sacks for Ojulari. He normally meets that. The only way he wouldn't is if he's injured, which consistently throughout the years he's been pretty banged up, but he still finds a way to get to that 5 to 8 sack total. He's never had double digits, but in all but 1 year, he's had at least 5 sacks. So I'll take the over on Azeez Ojulari at 4.5, and then Joshua Uche's at 3.5. I'm optimistic about Uche as well. If they just let him pin his ears back, be pass rusher on obvious passing situations, don't force him to play on early downs against the run. I don't think he's that player. That's why he fell out of favor with the Patriots. I think that's why he was a healthy scratch with Kansas City. If they let him just be somebody that's just going after the quarterback, I think he can reach that total as well. Like, if the Eagles have a bunch of players, I don't know if they're going to have anybody in double-digit sacks this year. If there is one, I think it's Nolan Smith. But I do think they're going to have a lot of guys that have, 3 to 7 sacks, 4 to 7 sacks. I think it's going to be more of a committee approach this year on the defensive line. I think they're going to rotate more this year. It's going to be more of an even split from a snap perspective. So when I was looking through this and setting the over-under lines for a lot of these guys, I found myself taking the over. Now, of course, I'm more optimistic naturally, and, it's coming off a Super Bowl year, and right now training camp is still a few weeks away. We might find out Uche is just not a player they're going to keep on the roster. Maybe Ojulari is banged up. Maybe Jordan Davis is still just looking like the same guy he's always been. But right now, I think, and again, I'm not saying anyone's going to blow up and be who Milton Williams was last year and earn a $26 million a year contract, but I do think each one of these guys should thrive next to Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith in a Vic Fangio system. So I'm taking the overs on the majority of these players on defense. And then there was one guy on offense that I did want to talk about, and it's Jahan Dotson. I set his over-under at 400.5 receiving yards. So that would be a pretty big jump from last year where he had just a little over 200. But I like the over here, and actually the majority of you agreed with me on my poll I put up on X. I think like 70% of you guys said you agree. He's going to double his receiving total, which seems like a lot, especially when they still have Saquon Barkley, Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert. But why I think he'll do it is, number one, Dotson, I think, really gain the trust of Jalen Hurts in the playoffs with that touchdown against Green Bay, with those two explosive plays in the Super Bowl against Kansas City. I feel like Hurts and Dotson, their chemistry was growing, right? So I think that's a big part of this. He's now in his second year with the Eagles. He understands the offense. He's on a much better track from a rapport perspective with Jalen Hurts. Then you also add on to the fact that I think they're going to throw the football more. I think it's going to be more of a balanced offensive attack between the passing game and the run game. So naturally, in that way, there's also going to be more targets for Dotson. And Dallas Goedert, until he proves us wrong, you pretty much know he's going to miss at least 3 to 5 games a year. And if he's missing 3 to 5 games this year, Dotson's going to be that third option in the passing game. And if they're throwing more, if he has better chemistry with Jalen Hurts and he knows the offensive system better this year, I just think there is enough mouths to feed for where Dotson can get to 400 receiving yards. I'm not even saying he's going to get to 500 plus, but I don't think 400 is that crazy. If Jalen Hurts, you got to remember, the Eagles were throwing the football less than anybody last year. Jalen Hurts didn't even have 3,000 passing yards. If you look at Jalen's total in 2022 and 2023, he's never hit 4,000 total. But if he hits that 3,500 to 3,800 passing yard a year mark that he normally does, that's a lot more. That's another 1,000. It's likely to be another 1,000 passing yards that you're adding on to Jalen's total this year. You don't think 200 of those can go to Dotson? I'm hammering that over. Whatever Dotson's season-long receiving yards total is on FanDuel this year, I'm taking that. I think he's going to be a good role player. And he was last year when his name was called. And he had to hit that 1-3 ball in the corner. As I always say, LeBron James finally got him the ball in the corner. He takes 1 or 2 shots a game. You're expected to make those shots. Dotson made those shots. I think he's going to get more opportunities to catch the ball this year. So I'm going to take the over on Dotson as well at 400.5 receiving yards for 2025. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, we'll wrap up the show talking about the edge rusher position again. I thought of some more players that I was doing these over-unders, and I'm like, okay, I do feel optimistic. But if Uche doesn't pan out, Ojulari doesn't pan out, Jalix Hunt doesn't take that next step, and they need edge rushers, I've got a couple more names to watch on the open trade market. We'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. All right, so there's been a couple shows the last few weeks on Locked On Eagles where I've discussed the idea of bringing in another pass rusher on the edge, especially since they traded Bryce Huff away. They still have 4 guys that I think they really want to be the main 4 in the rotation. They want Nolan Smith and Jalix Hunt to be the guys. They want Azeez Ojulari and Joshua Uche to be these low, cost-controlled contract guys that give you a lot of bang for your buck. They're very underpaid. You're banking on the ceiling, even though there's a lower floor. It's a low-risk, high-reward move. That's what they want this edge rusher rotation to look like. They want it to be Smith and Hunt, and then Ojulari and Uche. But let's say Ojulari gets banged up this year. Let's say Uche during camp just doesn't look like he's getting the job done. Or Jalix Hunt is just not ready to take the Nolan Smith-like step in year 2 that Nolan took last year in 2024. I do think there are a lot of options out there for Howie Roseman to explore bringing in more edge rushers. And I've mentioned a lot of names over the last couple of weeks, free agents, Preston Smith, Jadeveon Clowney, Von Miller is out there, Zadarius Smith. There's a lot of names. I said Clowney, right? Yeah, I said Clowney. There's some names that I think they would be interested in. Matthew Judon is another guy that's right now in the UFA pool. So he's there for the taking if these guys don't get the job done. If they want to explore trade, and we're not talking a trade for like TJ Watt, Trey Hendrickson, they're not going for the big fish because they know there also comes contract expectations with those guys too. And they're not giving out big extensions with the Jalen Carter deal coming soon and, the Nolan Smith contract coming soon. So if they want more of a lower tier trade for a younger player, more of a Howie Roseman type of trade where you get ahead of a player's ceiling. Before they reach the ceiling, you're trying to get in 1 year early rather than 1 year late when the price is going to go up. And this was the idea behind bringing in Bryce Huff. That's why I liked the logic. The execution didn't work, but I like the idea behind it. If they want to try something like that again, there are 3 players that potentially could be on the trade block based on what teams did this offseason in the draft and free agency that I kind of like the idea of. Again, in the event that Uche and Ojulari and Hunt, you're just not really feeling confident about those guys being solid role players behind Nolan Smith. There's 3 names that we haven't talked about that I like. And the number one guy that I'm really watching is Arnold Ebiketie from the Atlanta Falcons, a second-round pick out of Penn State in 2022. He was actually my guy for me coming out that year. Ebiketie has been a player that hasn't taken like a massive step. He hasn't really blown up as this double-digit sack player. But, again, for what the Eagles might need as a 3rd or 4th guy in a rotation to replace who Brandon Graham has been the last few years or who Josh Sweat was as a, 7 to 10 sack a year guy. I think Ebiketie can be that guy. He's young, only heading into year 4. He's had back-to-back 6-sack seasons. So he had 6 sacks last year, 6 sacks in 2023. He's starting to be consistent and putting together some solid pass rush production. He's been, I think, the Falcons' most consistent edge rusher over the last couple of years. Why would he be available, you ask? Well, look at what the Falcons did this offseason. They drafted Jalen Walker in the first round. They trade out a future first-round pick to get back into day 1 and take another edge rusher in James Pierce. They also signed Leonard Floyd in free agency. So the Falcons have reinvented that defensive line. They are just trying to rebuild and finally make it work because the Falcons, since as long as I've been alive, have always had issues with edge rusher, right? So this year they went all in on that, fixing it with Leonard Floyd, Jalen Walker, James Pierce. Maybe they want Arnold Ebiketie to be part of that 4-man rotation, but if the Eagles came to the Falcons and said, hey, we got 13 draft picks next year, we'll give you a 3rd or 4th round, a conditional 4 that could become a 3 based on Ebiketie's production, I don't think the Falcons are totally phone shut off stubborn about Ebiketie. I think he is available. I would not be surprised at all if he's on Atlanta's trade block. He's somebody that I would call about, and that's such an Eagles trade. Like a young player that's starting to put together some consistent years, 6 sacks last year, 6 sacks the year before. The Eagles don't want him to be the guy. They just need him to be a solid player. Again, get us 6 to 10 sacks this year, and boom, we'll take that as the 3rd or 4th guy in this rotation if Uche or Ojulari don't work out. I think that's something really to keep an eye out for at the end of July or early August in the preseason. If Uche and Ojulari aren't getting the job done, Ebiketie is somebody that I think that might be my favorite idea right now of a plan B at edge. And there's some other names too in Arizona. Arizona stole Josh Sweat. They also drafted Jordan Birch in the 3rd round, an edge rusher out of Oregon who I really like. They have Darius Robinson who plays kind of inside and out. They have BJ Ojulari. They have Zaven Collins. They might call up Atlanta, or I should say Arizona, and say, hey, Zaven Collins, maybe they want to add another Ojulari, the brothers. Maybe BJ Ojulari is available. These are guys that kind of like Ebiketie. They have gotten 4 to 6 sacks a year. They're young players, former 1st, 2nd round picks, day 1 or day 2 selections. Howie Roseman loves to kick the tires on those kind of players. These are names to consider, and I think these kind of trades make more sense than they're not trading for Trey Hendrickson. It's just not happening. They're not trading for TJ Watt. Adam Schefter said it last week on the Philly airwaves that Howie's just not making that type of move this year. And I think he's shown that based on what he's done in free agency and the draft. But if they want to make a trade that the Eagles are very accustomed to, dating back to 2016, Arnold Ebiketie, Zaven Collins, BJ Ojulari, those are some of the names, the kind of names that you should really watch out for. because Arizona has a deep defensive line now with a lot of young players they like. Same with Atlanta. They've invested a lot now in Jalen Walker and James Pierce. They have a proven veteran that's going to be a top 3 guy in snaps in Leonard Floyd. The Eagles, maybe if you want to buy low on one of these younger players to be part of this rotation, I don't hate that idea. So training camp's going to be really important for Hunt, Ojulari, and Uche. If they don't get the job done, Howie's taking a risk this year more than he normally does. He's prioritizing the ceiling over the floor at edge. But he knows how important this position is to compete for Super Bowls year after year, and he is not going to settle here. I'm just saying, if these guys are not turning heads early in camp, I do think Howie will make a move. I don't think he's going to kind of just sit on his hands and say, whatever. Edge this year is going to be kind of a position we win in spite of. No, like Howie Roseman never allows the trenches to be something you're winning with or winning in spite of. He wants to win because of the trenches. And so this is a big summer. And I think those are some names to keep an eye out for if things don't work out with those, low risk, high reward signings. Ebiketie, Collins, Ojulari. Call up somebody in Arizona or Atlanta if you want a pass rusher. I don't think that's a bad idea at all. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Eagles. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. Make sure your second listen is the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast with Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino, breaking down the entire NFL from a really zoomed-in perspective of roster building, talking about a lot of young players, getting you ready for the NFL season in 2025, which is going to be here before you know it. It's on every podcast platform right here on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks as always for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.